cheering for me. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. My name is Nate Britton. Okay, that's a solid, I'd say half or more of you. So welcome. We're thrilled that you're here. For people who have been here before, thank you for coming back and welcome back. I'll just give a few notes for housekeeping before we begin the discussion tonight. We have our bars open. Hopefully you took advantage of the cocktail hour. Our indoor bar is right around the corner here, and if you go around the corner from there, you will find the restrooms, and the authors will be available for signing books after the event. I just want to give a quick heads up on what we have coming up so that if you're here for the first time, you can come on back, and if you're a repeat offender, you will know what we've got going on here. If you'd like to expand your weekend plans to include more Vinegar Hill, we have comedian Todd Barry coming tomorrow. That is at 8 p.m. He's a very renowned stand-up comedian from New York City. We're really excited to have him here. He's been here in the past. It is his half joking tour, which means he's doing half written material and half crowd work. So only pick up that ticket if you are brave, because you might get crowd worked. But it should be a really good time. That's tomorrow at 8 p.m. And then on Sunday, we have the Kingston Trio. It is not the original members. They're playing the big barn in the sky, but we have the current iteration of the Kingston Trio keeping that band alive. So we had the Platters back in June or July, and it was the same kind of situation, and it was an excellent show. So come for the nostalgia. That's going to be a really good time too. And that's an early show. That one is happening at 7 o'clock on Sunday, and the tickets can be purchased at vinhillmusic.com. Low ticket warning for the Kingston Trio. Last but not least, I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. As you well know, this is an event to benefit the Graves Memorial Library. Yeah. And your patronage here generated over $11,000 in ticket sales. So give yourselves a round of applause for that. Really a testament to the strength of this community, and I'm a huge library fan, so I love to see it. All right, that's all I've got for you. So I'm going to turn it over to somebody that most people in this room probably already know. Here at Vinegar Hill, we know her as a volunteer usher. But even if you don't know her, there's a good chance that she serves you as your librarian. So please welcome Mary Lou Bukuvalis. Thank you.
Testing. Okay. Welcome. Before we get started, we would like to thank our friends here at Vinegar Hill for allowing us to be in this very magical space. I did see a show of hands, and it's really nice to see new folks coming here and experiencing Vinegar Hill property. We also want to thank Rosemary and Billy Shore, the team at Hurlbut Design, for setting this beautiful stage. Ann Rayner for providing delicious snacks. Print, a bookstore, and all independent bookstores for doing what they do and keep them alive, please.
Yeah.
The fundraising committee, and of course, Mike Kelly, who you probably can't see, but he's up in the balcony filming every one of you. So for those folks who can't attend, we try to record these so that we can watch them after the fact. I like to watch them over and over and over again. So, and thank you all for supporting our small but mighty nonprofit in so many different ways, especially for being here tonight. Without you, we are not Graves Library. And if you haven't visited our great space in a while, we encourage you to take a trip to the bookseller. We do have some really wonderful programs going on all the time, and our shelves are always full of new offerings. Thank you to Josh Bodwell.
Yeah.
Executive Director of David R. Godine Publisher in Boston, for being our moderator tonight. Josh is a former Board Graves Library Board member. It goes far back as riding his bicycle to the library to pick out his first few books. So, and he's also a personal friend. So he's He's somebody that always makes time for me and our community, and we really appreciate you. So when I think about Andre Dubus III, the term empathy immediately comes to mind. One of the gifts that Andre gives to the literary world is to create the feeling of empathy with his characters. From Danny Ahern in his recent novel, Gone So Long, to the unforgettable Kathy, Nicola, and Amir Barani in his breathtaking House of Sand and Fog. We readers become people passing an accident. We don't want to look, but we can't look away. We hold our breath and we turn the pages. For his work, he has been a finalist for the National Book Award and was awarded the Guggenheim Fellowship, the National Magazine Award for Fiction, 2 Pushcart Prizes, and is a recipient of an American Academy of Arts and Letters Award in Literature. His books are published in over 25 languages, and he teaches full-time at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. Yeah. Andre is a husband, a father, a teacher, and a passionate storyteller. So when we think about Richard Russo, the term...
I try not to.
The term character immediately comes to mind. One of Richard's gifts, great gifts, to the literacy world is creating such strong and interesting characters. Who does not love Donald Sully Sullivan from the North Bath trilogy, or Hank Devereaux from Straight Man? When we read these novels, we immediately see ourselves becoming neighbors, shoppers in the same stores, and wanting to personally help these characters out of some pretty dicey situations. Richard has written 10 novels, 2 short story collections, and a memoir. In 2002, he received a well-deserved Pulitzer Prize for Empire Falls. He is also the father of 2 daughters, one of whom is a novelist herself, and one of whom we hope you, you didn't meet her tonight, but you bought books from her bookstore tonight. Like Andre, Richard is a husband, a father, a teacher, and a passionate storyteller. We hope you enjoy this evening. On behalf of Graves Library, thank you so much for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Andre Dubus III and Richard Russo.
By the way, that was the Maine Librarian of the Year, Mary Lou.
How about it?
Stole my opening line, brother.
Oh, sorry, buddy.
No, that's good. That's good. I'm just going to put a
back.
PS on that. That's how the night's going to go. You're going to step all over my script here. As Mary Lou mentioned, I had the great honor of serving on the library board for 6 years, which was an amazing full circle, to go back to the library. That was the library I had my first library card at. And if one thing happens while you're on that board, at the end of it, you have an undying loyalty to Mary Lou Bukovalis. And we've all got it really good. If I were on the board right now, I'd be finding a way to give her a raise. Maybe with some
Alas.
the proceeds. If only there was an event with some proceeds that could go toward. And in all seriousness, we're at a moment in America that seems kind of unthinkable, but books are being banned again. And actually, our librarians are, as usual, on the front lines of such things. So there's always a good time to support your local library, but there's kind of never a better time right now.
Hear, hear.
That's it.
So I've been lucky enough to be around a lot of writers over the past few decades, and sometimes when I'm chatting with readers, they want to know about who are the divas and asses that I've interacted with. So human nature, right? Like Josh knows what I try to pivot quickly, and try to talk about who are the decent, kind writers that I have interacted with. And I legitimately always say the tie for number one is these two men right here. These two.
I'll arm wrestle you for number one.
Shit, Rick. How's number two treating you? If you look up, the definition of the word mensch, you're going to find a photo of these guys. These are salt of the earth. So I'm personally very grateful to both of you for being here tonight to support my first library. Thank you.
Likewise, thank you.
Thank you.
Indeed.
So I was trying to figure out where to start tonight, which is usually, kind of the hardest part. And I got this note on the fridge, this line from Ann Beattie, and I caught my eye. So it says, "It's helpful to know to begin at the most simple level, even if I don't always remember to do that." It's great writing advice. It's good life advice.
Say it again. It's
helpful to know to begin at the most simple level, even if I don't always remember to do that.
Love it.
Ann?
Okay, and good night. Hey, they agreed, they walked off.
So what's the most simple level? And I thought...
I'm not sure I have another level, so I'm not... Where would I begin if not there?
If this is your simple, then we're all screwed. I thought the simplest place to begin was something I've never really talked about with either of you, which is what do you remember of that moment when you decided to not just be someone who loved to read, but someone who would write?
Well, another round, please, back. So I wrote about this in my memoir, Townie. It was, I will compress if I can. My wife says I cannot, but I'm going to compress.
She's not here.
I grew up in tough circumstances like a lot of kids. Single mom, first world poverty, dad wasn't around a lot. There's a lot of violence in my youth. I hated violence. I became a kid who fought, but mainly I was going after cruelty and bullies, and I became a very dangerous young man, and as a way to stop my violence, I started to box. Just I'm going to make it a sport. I'm not going to go after people who hit their wives in bars, and I knew I was going to get killed doing this, or maybe worse, I was going to kill someone else, which I think is worse. And I don't believe in God, but I believe in the divine, and I was training for the Golden Gloves down in Lowell, and I was living in Lynn, the city of sin, and I was working construction, and something that I can only call the divine made me sit down with a cup of tea. I'm in my sweats to go train at the boys' club with Tony Pavoni, and Tony Pavoni, and I wrote from the point of view of a young woman losing her virginity in her boyfriend's car in the misty Maine woods, and when I finished, I felt like I'd been writing for 10 minutes, but it was clearly over an hour, and I felt like Andre for the first time. I said, okay, here I am, and I've been writing 5-6 days a week since that night in Lynn 40 years ago. I haven't heard your story. I'm dying to hear it.
Well, when I was 18, I grew up in a mill town in upstate New York. When I was 18, at my mother's insistence, we traveled all the way across the country, or most of the way across the country, to Tucson, Arizona, where I enrolled first in a BA program, but it was during Vietnam, and you did what you could during that period to kind of hang around. So I did. So I did the BA. And then I did an MA, and then I did a PhD, and then I went back and did an MFA after the PhD. By that time, the war was over.
And you were overeducated.
But no, but the idea, I think the idea that my mother had in mind when we went out to Arizona, leaving this upstate New York mill town that I've been writing about forever, or variations on it. I think that her idea was for me to kind of enter the witness protection program, where I would put all of my young life behind me. I think she wanted me to become an English professor, which I became before I became a writer. She wanted me to become an English professor. This is exactly the opposite sort of story that you just heard from Andre as far as the various ways that people can become writers. But so I went out, I entered the witness protection program. I became a PhD in American literature. And one day, because I was unhappy, I walked across the hall from the English department to the door marked Director of Creative Writing. And I think the reason it took me so long, because I'd been at it then, I'd been at an education, I've been in the education business for God knows, well over a decade. But I still, despite all of my literary heroes, whether it was Twain or Dickens, who would have taught me, if they taught me anything, that you don't need to have a pedigree to be a writer. You do not. Writers come from everywhere. But I didn't think they came from where I came from. And it took me all those years, despite what I knew about not having to have that I didn't have to have a pedigree, I simply could not fathom the possibility that anyone would want to read about the people that I wanted to write about, people who were unseen, who lived in unseen places in America. And that's the moment that I remember crossing the hall. It wasn't very far. It took me 12 years or thereabouts, but it was across the hall, knocked on the door of creative writing, and the man inside who became my mentor, I said, I think I might like to try to write a story. And he said, have you ever written one? I said, no. And he said, well, write one. And I did, gave it to him. It stank. He told me so. He said, but you could use some lessons. So that's the story of my arriving belatedly, and I was 30-something then, before it occurred to me that there was the possibility that anyone would want to read about the kinds of people that I wanted to write about.
Do you remember your first writing session, though, with that story? Do you remember that first moment?
Well, I remember that I was still in the witness protection program, and what I think I wanted to write about was all the stuff in the world that I didn't know anything about. If I could have been anybody, I would have been Ross MacDonald. I think I would have written about tough guy detectives. I would have written about dames. I would have written about violence. I would have written about all the stuff that I had no experience in my life. And it all would have taken place in California, of course, where I'd never been. So, of course. So yeah, if I had been able to imagine myself as a writer, that's the writer I would have imagined myself to be. I still had not figured out yet who I was or who I might be.
Amazing.
That's great.
It's hard to imagine you guys at a point when you weren't writers. You know, this many books in.
Yeah.
That flick of that switch is amazing. Or that long walk across the hall. We won't get into the pathology.
Do you still at times have trouble? I mean, I'm older than you are, of course, by a decade or so, but I still there's a point, and I wonder if it was like that for you, Andre. There was a point where when Mohawk, my first novel, was circulating, if the devil manifesting in some other way had come to me and said, all right, we'll give you this one book, but after that you're done. I was so hungry for that one book. If somebody had made that deal with me, You take this for sure, but if you take it, you're done. Otherwise, well, we'll just see what happens. I think I would have taken that deal,
Yeah, I would have
which is why now, there are still times when I've had a career for far longer than I ever dreamed I would, but I still think back at the time when I would have taken that deal, gladly taken that deal.
Yeah.
Which is hard to be for now. So now I still think about, the possibility, even after all of these books, the possibility of my not ever having become a writer is still very real to me.
Did that book circulate for a long time? What was the story of that book?
It was rejected 25, 30 times.
Mine first was rejected 39 times, Rick. So I'm a bigger loser than you, so there.
Oh, we're going to arm wrestle again.
39 times.
That's amazing. And
Over
what,
7
House of Sand
years,
and Fog was 30, right?
House of
Or
Sand and
thereabout?
Fog was 29 publishers before it got taken.
Yeah.
And now it's in 30 countries, so there.
So, any aspiring writers in the room? These are good stories to keep the faith.
Real quick, though, it was also a time when agents really worked harder on behalf of writers. Now, agents, I'm hearing from my students and former students that after 6 rejections, they give up, and that breaks my heart. I had an agent who would send it around for 30, 40, 50 publishers.
Yeah.
4 or 5.
Yeah.
It breaks my heart.
Yep.
What else is on your mind over
That's
there?
a conversation for the green room, I think. More alcohol. So now, the first books came out. You guys became writers. You're many books into these long, award-winning, storied careers. I'm very interested about some of, as an avatar for the audience, I'm very interested about where you guys are with crafts now. Are either of you plotters? Do you plot in advance?
Plot or plod?
Yeah, that's great.
Touche.
I'm a plodder. I plod with it.
Because I'm one but not the other.
Don't say you're a plotter, because then Andre will say, no, I'm more of a plotter. Turn the whole thing.
Yeah.
Plot. I mean, we're here tonight, your third book of an intricately locked, long 3-book series. I'm not saying you were planning book 3 when you started book 1, but
No.
How much do you do before you just sit down and write that first paragraph?
Nothing.
Nothing.
I too, nothing. There's a line I love from some ancient anonymous poet, I think from Asia. We poets knock upon the silence for an answering music. Don't you love that? And I think I started maybe a novel 5 days ago. I don't know. But the pencil moved and somebody showed up and I'm following and it's terrifying and how about you, man? I have not lost 1 ounce of enthusiasm for the actual writing process because it's so frigging scary and disorganized. And
Yeah, I haven't either. I'm just as enthusiastic as I was at the beginning, although my process has changed a lot. I've become, no surprise, more cantankerous, and I start revising. I start revising earlier. So I still, Josh, no, I don't plot out anything. I have a certain sense. What I'm always looking for is a kind of electricity that you get from something, even when it's not very good. But is it about the right thing? Is it about the right people? Am I focusing my attention on something that is absolutely essential to me and will be very important to these characters? If I can feel that, even if the writing that I do that day absolutely sucks, and it will, especially at the beginning, most days. If that sense of electricity is there, then I have faith in the fact that I will arrive someday, 3 years from now or 4 years from now. I will arrive. But it's what do I know? Precious little. And I don't know about you, Andre, but I would say that the fact that I know so little at the beginning of the book is the good news.
Yeah.
And it's terrifying. I think it's terrifying to beginning writers because they want to know.
Right.
You know, and if they know, if there's something they can be sure of, then that gives them the confidence to go forward. Whereas I think a lot of novelists are happy. I don't want to say happy stupid, but they're happy with the unknowing of the story and the sense of the kind of detective work that goes into figuring it out. It's not about what you know.
No, you know, I don't own a GPS. I never will. I'm always late because I can't find anything. But I like getting lost. And I was telling Rick, Rick and I saw each other last week, and I was doing a talk in Morristown, New Jersey, and for 2 hours in the rain, I couldn't find Morristown, New Jersey. I met a nice Pakistani gas station owner. I met a nice other man. I met a nice Turkish man, and I met a beautiful young cop pulled me over, thank God, and got me to the... But my point is, and I've talked about this with my students, especially older students. I think all of those qualities that make for a responsible adult, you know, all right, if you're going to have a mortgage, you better have a job. If you're going to have kids, you should probably have health care. You know, if you're going to have a car payment, you know, you should be able to afford it to keep driving a car. So our daily lives are full of control and not being lost and not being clueless. But I think all of those qualities that make us responsible adult citizens get in the way of being a creative writer.
Or an artist of any kind. Of any sort.
I show up with no plan, reckless. Woo, we're going to ride this bomb down. If it goes, it goes.
Yeah.
And it's terrifying and disorganized and messy, and I friggin' love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just feel so alive when I do it. When I don't write, I just finished something a few weeks ago, and I had 2 weeks of not writing, and that's when I know I'm a writer, by the way. How about you? When I'm not writing, I realize, oh, I guess I am a writer, because I feel so dumb.
Yeah, yeah.
Did I bleep it? I think I bleeped it.
I just, I'm lost. I am absolutely lost when I'm not writing. It's the reason I'm always writing. It's because I don't, what would I do? I mean,
right.
It's not what I write. I'm not writing what I think. Writing is how I think. So if I'm not writing, even if I'm writing badly, that doesn't bother me at all. Writing badly does not bother me at all, which is good.
Yeah. It's part of the plotting.
He can write worse than me.
I write wicked worse than Rick.
But no, I get frantic. I get my skin feels different. I just nothing feels right if I'm not putting pen to paper.
I will say though, he really is a really good cook. You could always cook.
Could always.
But even that is connected to writing in the sense that at the end of the day, where you're doing this sort of stuff that is so cerebral, it's in your head, it's in your heart, it's in your gut. It's what you're feeling, it's what you're thinking, it's what your heart is telling you you love. All of that is important, but boy, at the end of the day, it's good to chop an onion. You know,
so good. Little olive oil in the hot pan.
Yeah.
Yep.
And sip a wee bit of Merlot.
You earned it. You earned it. Okay, so you guys are both practitioners of the great El Doctoro line, right? You can drive across the country by the light of your headlights and you'll make it. You don't need to see further than that.
You can't see any farther. But, you know, if you had two other writers here, and I'm talking about, you know, writers who are in stature every bit, you know, our equal, certainly, they would tell you a very different story. I mean, John Irving is famous for saying, who in the world would start out on a journey without knowing his destination? And he's also famous. He's also famous for writing. He wants to know the exact ending, and he will often write the last, either the last sentence or I can't remember the last paragraph or whatever of the novel, so that's his destination, and then he can go back. And I'd never tell any of my students when I'm teaching. I would never tell any student of mine that's the wrong way to go about things. It's the wrong way for me. Obviously, Andre, that's the wrong way for you. Yeah. But who can fault John Irving's career.
But is there a moment, whether it's, well, you don't know at the time, are you halfway through, are you 70% through? Is there a moment where suddenly you see the end, imagine the end, and that's exciting?
You know, for me, it's like when you're in a bad relationship. I haven't been in one in a long time. I've been happily married for 35 years, but you can feel the end of the relationship coming up. Maybe it's February, maybe it's June, maybe it's Tuesday. And that's how it feels for me. I can feel the end approaching. Although it's not so negative. It's actually a more uplifting feeling that. It feels more like something's coming to its fruition. And it's if I teach anything in writing classes, I really just, what I'm trying to throw out there, and again, I'm totally with Rick, there's no right way to do it, there's no wrong way to do it. But I do think the writing's larger than the writer. And when I totally let go, I was talking about Rumi the other day, the 12th century Afghani poet. He said, sell your cleverness and purchase bewilderment. And whenever I allow myself to be truly bewildered, really wonderfully surprising things happen, right? And then you can feel that sort of break in the trees up ahead. I think we're going to maybe land there. And you don't know what the landing's going to be, but my God, is it hard to sleep at night when you're towards the end of a novel. I find that insomnia is my friend, man. I can't sleep. That electricity follows you the rest of the day.
Yeah. I don't necessarily feel the end coming, but what I feel often is something that makes me feel a little bit more sure-footed that I'm on the right path. I remember with Empire Falls, I was probably a year into the writing of it, and I can't remember where I was in the book. That was a book that was written out of a kind of parental existential dread, because my daughters were coming into that age where, we want our children to have we want them to have personal, private lives. You don't expect your kids when they're growing up to tell you everything past a certain age. But that book was an exercise in parental dread, and I wrote and wrote and wrote, and I remember very distinctly one day, I don't know how many hundred pages I wrote something. I wrote a scene, and at the end of it, I thought to myself, okay, this is a book about cruelty. And I had never had that. I had never known that about the book. I had to have been, I don't know how many pages that book was, but if it was 600 pages, I was probably 300 pages into it, where I didn't know that Miles's daughter, Tick, was going to survive the shooting in that book until I wrote the scene. But what I did know at that point was, okay, now I know what this book is about, which must mean that before that, I didn't know what it was about. I didn't know, when you can crystallize it in a word like that, this is a book about cruelty. Then you begin, if you can say that, then you can look at everything that you've written so far, and then you can begin to turn the ducks. All right, this doesn't do that, so we're going to maybe pare that down a little bit. This does do that, so we're going to turn the volume up a little bit on that. And that's when you have that. You may not know how it ends yet. You may not, but you do know. Your sense of direction becomes clearer, I think.
It coheres. Yeah, you get that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're nodding vigorously.
I just love how Rick just described that. It's a free fall into the dream world of your psyche, and everybody's got one, and everybody has an imagination. And by the way, after teaching creative writing for over 30-something years at the college level, I don't think anybody's imagination is any better than anybody else's. I really don't. So then what makes the distinction with work? I think it's how deeply you fall into that imagination and bring up what you find. And I just love how you describe that, Rick. And so as you go along, as you said earlier, if I'm too smart about something I'm working on, if I can feel its whole as I'm working, I feel it's already dead. It's already not alive for me. But if I'm dumbfounded and bewildered and curious and I keep walking through with that energy, you're right, 300-400 pages in, you start to get smarter about it. It's like, living with a spouse for decades. You go, oh, that's how you are. It takes a while, but then you tweak all the other things. So your new knowledge, and that's where revision is king. I think revision is everything. And I think that's when the writer has to be smart about what she's wrought in the final
In the revision, yeah.
But I love how you described that. That was beautiful.
You know,
I mean,
something about ducks?
how stupid, and on the one hand, you think to yourself, how stupid could I possibly have been to write 300 pages of Empire Falls and not know that it was a book about cruelty? Because now when you read it, I think probably any reader in this audience could figure that out in the first 50 pages.
But don't you think readers are smarter about books than the people who write them?
Well, they're obviously smarter than me.
I get a letter from a reader, I go, hey, I think she's right, it is about that. Good point.
Yeah.
I did ask you about the use of birds in your last novel, and you said, what? What are you talking about?
Didn't know there were birds in that.
We're almost halfway into this, you guys. This is crazy. Time's flying here, as I knew it would. So I want to move us towards some reading here. And I just grabbed this line from the New York Times review of Such Kindness, Andre. It says, this great review by Isaac Fitzgerald in the New York Times. At its core, this book is a hero's journey, but not one where the hero ends up somewhere wildly different from where he starts. This is a story of acceptance. A great line, and I was thinking about how that line applies to so much of your work, actually. Even to a degree, Townie, even your own story to a degree.
Yeah.
So here's the simple question. Is acceptance the destination of the hero's journey? You don't have to answer that if you just want to read it.
I wish I were smart enough to answer. So Flannery O'Connor, in one of her essays, she says brilliantly, a writer's beliefs are not what she sees, but the light by which she sees. If you want to learn what you feel about something, believe about something, it's just write really honestly, and your writing will tell you. But when I look back at my writing over the years, published in Non, I see some real, I bet you do too, I see some real patterns. And one of the things that I see in my own work with my characters, or even that memoir, or even essays, is I've always been haunted all my life, and this might come from my youth. I don't know. But this difference between reacting to a situation and responding. Right? We teach our kids, no, you're angry, count to 10 and walk over there, dear. Instead of slapping someone's face. And so I've always been haunted, I think, by how wrongly a life can go. And so I do think acceptance is part of it, though I wasn't thinking that writing that novel, Such Kindness. But I do want to share with you a wonderful line from the late, great Jim Harrison, who actually, if you haven't read Jim Harrison, please go read Harrison's novellas, read his poems. He was prolific in both forms. He actually died at his desk at age 79 writing a stanza of poetry, like at the desk. Not a bad way to go.
No.
You can go cutting onions might work too, but but you know the Buddhist phrase be here now. In one of his poems, he says, "Yeah, I try to do that." He says, "I also try to be now here." Isn't that great? And so I think that part of acceptance is just being fully present with every human being in your path all day and all life long. And I think that I believe that, and I think it came out in that novel, but I wasn't trying to make a point.
Not the easiest thing to do, by the way.
Right.
What you're talking about.
Yeah.
Right.
It involves, yeah.
Well, it involves suspending your ego.
I was just going to say, you're not looking in the mirror when you're looking at other people.
Right.
Yeah.
Philip Lopate has a great line. He's a great personal essayist. He says, if you're going to write about your life, whatever you do, please avoid the stench of the ego. Isn't that great? I think it's a good way to live your life.
Who was that?
Philip Lopate. Avoid
Oh.
the stench of the ego.
Beautiful. Will you read to us from Such Kindness? You can have a sip first.
Certainly.
Wet your whistle.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to read you the whole book. Start.
Page 1.
All right, I'm going to read for like 9 minutes. Is this good? I'm going to read from the beginning of chapter 3. And so the main character, it's the only novel I've written from one point of view. I like that multiple point of view narrative, but this is just one guy. His name's Tom Lowe Jr. He's 54 years old. When the novel opens, he's stealing, well, let me back up. He's lost everything. He was a builder and a small businessman. He was a very proud artisan, carpenter. And he built houses, and he had a beautiful wife and a beautiful son. And he grew up poor, the son of a single mom, a teenage mom. And he married a woman who grew up differently. And he wanted to give her everything. And so he takes a loan out for a house. It's an adjustable rate mortgage. 2008 comes along, it kicks in, the fine print kicks in, he can't pay the mortgage, he falls off a roof, gets horribly hurt, gets addicted to painkillers, his house gets repossessed, his wife leaves him, he loses his relationship with his son, and early on in the book, his car's been towed because his registration is lapsed. And that's how this cheerful novel begins. But in the opening scene, he's getting revenge on the banker who had him sign that adjustable rate mortgage loan, and he has stolen the banker's trash to steal credit card information and steal from the banker who he thinks stole from him. Trina is his next door neighbor. He lives in Section 8 housing. He calls it the 8. Oh, and I forgot to leave out, he's in chronic pain day and night. And it's my most hopeful book. I have spent many hours contemplating pain. Its constant presence seems like such a dark joke, really. Like the school bully who sits on your chest and spits in your face years after both of you have moved on. My pelvis and hips were fractured years ago. Do they have to keep spitting in my face? It's close to 9 and I lie on plywood over the cushions of my couch in the 8. On the floor near my feet is the Andrews household's unopened trash bag. From here, I can see through the thin plastic the outlines of commercial-sized envelopes, a sheaf of papers, and what looks like a pencil. On the other side of the wall, there's only quiet. No yelling, no barely muffled video games, no fucking. All day and night, I hear through its concrete walls the muffled sounds of bad behavior. Trina yells at her babies. She calls them names. She swears at them. Sometimes her boyfriend, Brian, will be there, and he yells and swears at them all. Some got their units here in the 8 by lottery, others because their family names were on the list for generations. I got mine through my former brother-in-law, Gerard, who was a boy when I married his older sister, a man who is now a lawyer and who, in an act of pity, secured me my own unit here in the 8. My neighbor Fitz drives a new Mustang. It's red with tinted windows, and when the inspectors come to check in on us, he hides it out behind the dumpsters filled with wet diapers and cigarette butts, with old TV sets and eggshells and used condoms, with plastic toys and empty bottles of wine. Fitz only pays me 75% the value of my EBT card. It's what I have to do so that I can buy the liquid pain distractor that keeps me from falling back to the O's, that and toilet paper, which I'm not allowed to put on my EBT card. After Fitz's cut, I'm left with only $100.38 for the month, and now Drew's birthday is in less than a week, though I have never stopped thinking of my son, ever. In the unit across the dirt yard from Trina's lives a young couple. He's black and she's white, and if I add their 2 ages together, I've still been on this earth 10 years longer. The woman's name starts with an A, Amber or Ashley, and she must have gotten pregnant in high school, and now they have 3 brown babies, all under the age of 6. Those kids are always dressed in clean clothes, their hair and faces washed. 2 boys and a girl. Their mother doesn't let play with Trina's kids, who are not clean and do not wear clean clothes. Trina's little one, Cody, 5 years old, looked at me one summer afternoon as I rose slowly from my Taurus, and he opened his little mouth and yelled, "Fucker!" I grew up with kids like that. In the next unit over lives an old woman. I believe she's close to 100. Every afternoon, a visiting nurse shows up in her blue Corolla. She spends an hour in there, then leaves. On Sundays, the old woman's son picks her up for church in his sedan, its rear passenger doors covered with white letters in cursive. Bon Giovanni shoe repair. He's a big man like me, though he has 20 years on me and is clean shaven. His bald head covered with a scally cap he takes off before stepping into his mother's unit. For the thousandth time, I think that I do not belong here. I do not belong here with any of these people. In just a few days, my son will turn 20, but how am I going to get to his campus 100 miles west? All because I drove Trina to the lab to sell her plasma to make rent. It's something I do every week. But this time, a young cop in his parked cruiser took note of the expired decal on my rear plate, and now, sitting on the plank over 2 stacks of books I call a coffee table, are the 3 crumpled fines that may as well be loaded guns pointed at my head. One is for $607 for driving an unregistered vehicle. Another is for $530 for driving an uninsured vehicle. And the third, because I left my empty wallet back in my unit, is $500 for driving without a license. The tally pushes hotly through my head, $1,637, and this doesn't even include the cost of towing and storing my Taurus, the only thing that ever gets me away from here. Usually at sundown, I drive out to Cape Ann to see what used to be my home. I leave the 8 in this neighborhood of box houses like the one I grew up in, the vans and pickup trucks in their driveways, the strip plaza across the street with a liquor store and a salon called Dawn's Hair and Nails. I accelerate east for the highway overpass, a McDonald's on the other side, then a Napa auto store next to a home for old people, the front lawn just a strip of grass between the sidewalk and a parking lot that was always full. I think of my mother then, of the early dementia that has claimed her, of how I should visit her, but not till I'm back on my feet. A pathetic phrase, really, given how much I have to endure when I stand. Sometimes I turn onto the entrance ramp of the highway. I join the traffic of my fellow human beings and feel, for a few miles anyway, part of them again. A man coming home after a long day's work. A man who had every intention of carrying his own weight. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm starting to think that Jude the Obscure feels bad for Tom Lowe. You know?
Yeah.
But I'm more than Tom's story. I was thinking about the rhythm and the musicality.
Yeah.
Yeah, in your lines and when you read.
Thank you.
It's always there in that interiority that you get in your characters. What I mean, I know you like music. I know you love.
I love music.
Love music. I know some of the musicians you love. Does music interact with your writing life at all? Do you read your work aloud often?
No, I actually I work in a soundproof cave about the size of a prison cell I built in my basement. It's already soundproof, and I put the headphones from my carpentry days over my ears. I can hear my heartbeat and my breath. But before it, and I write longhand pencil, but before I do that, I type the previous day's handwritten work, and I listen to music. But I'll listen to Springsteen, Tom Waits, Lucinda Williams, Bob Dylan, sometimes a little Mozart or Miles Davis. But and then I read poetry. I read poetry every day, and then I turn it all off and get to it. How about you? You don't write with music, right?
No,
Yeah.
no, but music. The only other life I ever thought of for myself, the only other career I ever considered was music. I used to play a mean 12-string guitar, actually, but
Seriously?
Yeah.
all through when I was in graduate school.
Yeah.
When my wife and I were first dating, I had like a 7-8 year gig at a restaurant in downtown Tucson.
You're kidding me.
No,
He was
no.
a witness protection.
That's not in elsewhere.
Yeah.
Did you guys know this?
Nobody does. As a matter of fact, I quit playing guitar almost to the day when I started writing.
Wow.
And I mean, music has meant nothing, still means as much to me now as it did then, but I just sensed that I didn't have enough creative juice for both things.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Wow. Who knew?
What was your set like? What was your set list?
Oh my God, it was the 70s. So it was Loggins and Messina, John Denver. My God, it was just awful.
No Eagles.
What was it?
Yes, and
James Taylor.
Yeah, of course. No Livingston Taylor.
No.
We won't go there, but
Is there a 12 string in the house? Well, with your work, I mean, Mary Lou brought up character, but I think also it would be rare to read a review of one of your books that didn't mention wit and humor.
Yeah, it's great.
And that strikes me as like its whole other level of pressure. You know, like Tolstoy and Hemingway didn't have to worry about being funny. But now you have this reputation.
yeah.
How is that? I mean, there's nothing harder than being funny on the page, frankly. How has that built up over the years? Are you sensitive to that at all, or do you just block it out?
It's just the way I see the world. I think a writer. I think who a writer is determined by what he sees or thinks or hears twice. For me, I think there's a kind of triage that goes on for most writers where you'll hear somebody say something, or you'll watch something happen in real life, or you'll read something in the newspaper, and you'll say, okay, this is interesting. So that's number one. But is it of any use to me? And so I think we all the longer we write, the more we do this triage without even thinking about it. Okay, this is so for me. There's this, because my bandwidth is fairly narrow. There's this. Imagine an enormous dumpster, and all the things that happen to me in my life, all the things that I witness firsthand, or that I hear about, or that I read about, or whatever, most of what happens to me ends up in that enormous dumpster, which is not because it's not interesting. I mean, it's every bit as interesting as the things that I make use of. But my triage is, at this point, could fit in a folder about like that. But the stuff that goes in that folder, whether there is no folder, I'm not writing anything down, but my triage is such that when something happens to me, or I witness something, I see something, I read something, I think this is not only interesting, but I can use this. So back when I was teaching at Penn State Altoona, and I was walking around the duck pond with my friend Kel Melling, who was the director of, who was the dean of faculty, and he was complaining to me about the fact that he couldn't get his money that year. That the legislature had not given him the money so that he could hire his adjuncts, which he needed to do. They needed to know that they had a job. And he couldn't, and he was desperate to tell them, yes, you've got your job, but until he had the money himself in his greedy little fist, he couldn't do anything about it. And so he couldn't give them even that slender assurance. And he was so frustrated, he was furious with himself, and he said, what am I gonna do? Threaten to kill a duck a day until they give me my goddamn money?
That went in the dumpster.
The folder.
10 years. It took me 10 years.
Yeah.
It was 10 years later when I wrote Straight Man. Wow. And that went into the folder.
Yeah.
And that's the triage. So when you say, is it hard to be funny? No, it's not hard to be funny. It's not. I mean, it's just the way I see the world, and the way I'm able to, when things come in, when I'm processing whatever's happening to me in life, there's wonderful stuff that I know would be of paramount importance to another writer. And so there are times, many times, when I wish I were that other writer.
Right.
But I know who, at this point, I'm 74, I know who I am. Most times.
Most time. Quick trivia
Yeah.
of his folder.
Yeah.
Kathy's house and her eviction came out of the Boston Globe, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
House of Sand and Fog. Boston Globe clipping.
Rick, while you're describing that, but by dumpster, I know that that's in Straight Man, but I thought the dumpster was where you dived to fill the folder, and that came out of the dumpster to go into the folder.
So it's a rewrite. Giving you
Dumpster
a rewrite.
diving is literary technique. No, but I love that description, but it makes me think about your earlier comment.
Don't you have a triage?
I do.
Yeah,
I do.
That you do is you don't always, you're not even aware of it most of the time.
No, and you're not
But
consciously
yeah.
looking, but something will. I mean, my novel, The Garden of Last Days, that came out in 2008, I was reading the Globe, and I read about, after the horrible Tuesday in September 2001, and I read about these brainwashed genocidal maniacs having gone to strip clubs on both coasts of Florida. I thought, well, how can you be so deranged in your interpretation of Islam to do what you did, but then go to fall in places like strip clubs? And they also hired call girls. The night before their mission, they hired call girls. And one of the group of three of them sent the call girl back. She was in Boston because they thought it was too expensive. I'm thinking, at that point, what do you care? But they wanted to send the money back to the mission, to Al-Qaeda. So anyway, but what I couldn't get my mind around is, and again, to me, it's all about curiosity. Okay, what would it be like to have been a woman who's a stripper, who's danced naked for one of these men? And now after that horrible day, the smoke is cleared, you have some of their blood money in your bank account. Mm-hmm. And that one question gave birth to an 800-page, 14-person point of view novel.
That's a perfect description of the way this works.
That's it. But your earlier thing about your point about reading Ross MacDonald, and when you first started out, I'd love to be like Ross MacDonald. Thank God you allowed yourself to find your vision, your voice, and your way of looking at the world.
Well, the other wasn't working. I mean, I wrote half that Ross MacDonald novel.
Hey, where's Rick?
Will you read to us from your voice now?
Love to.
Great.
Love to. Quickly look here at what I need to fill you in on. Peter, Sully's son, in the earlier Fool novels. Sully's son Peter is teaching in New York, and in this section that I'm going to read, he has been teaching in New York, where his son Will. His son Will is actually in Pennsylvania going to school there, but he's been teaching in New York, doing a kind of itinerant scholarly gig sort of thing. And he is planning desperately what he's been trying to do for a very long time, which is to get the hell out of North Bath. Okay. In 3 weeks, in April, 3 weeks before Will was set to graduate from Penn, Peter had gotten a call from Ruth, his father's longtime paramour, that he had been dreading. His father had been in an accident, she informed him. No, he wasn't injured, but he had totaled his truck. And, surprise, surprise, alcohol had been involved. And because this was his third accident in 2 years, wait, what? Peter said, there'd been 2 others? His license was being revoked, which meant he could no longer make his usual rounds to Hattie's, the donut shop, the OTB, the horse. You're telling me he needs a keeper? Peter said. No surprise, Ruth bristled at that. I'm telling you he needs his son. Well, Peter said, also bristling, there were times as a kid when I needed him, and where was he? 2 words, Ruth told him. Grow up. Though this crisp advice, if that's what it was, had stung, it wasn't exactly unexpected. How many times over the years had he watched this same woman turn both barrels on his father and pull the trigger? Anyway, what was the point of getting pissed off at her It wasn't Ruth's fault that he had waited too long to fly the coop. And if he was honest, he probably wouldn't have lasted that much longer in New York anyway. Rising rents were quickly making the itinerant adjunct life, which had been crappy to begin with, unsustainable. And while it was true that his father hadn't been around much when he was growing up, it was Sully who had thrown him a rope that long ago Thanksgiving when he had slunk back into town, his marriage in tatters, no idea what to do next. Worse, after grabbing that rope, he had unjustly resented Sully for the loss of the academic life that he himself had so royally screwed up. So he called Ruth back the next morning and told her he'd wrap things up in the city as soon as he could and return to Bath. Do me a favor, though, he said. Don't tell him I'm coming. Okay, she agreed. Mind telling me why? I do, actually, he said. Because, for one thing, returning to North Bath would have a lot of moving parts, finishing his classes, turning in his grades, severing ties with the various institutions where he had been teaching, renting a van to transport the stuff that he had accumulated in the city, saying his goodbyes. Who knew how long that would take? More importantly, he was going to need time to come to terms with his decision. He didn't want to arrive back in Bath nursing a sense of grievance, resentful of the choice that he was freely making. To his surprise, things had gone more smoothly than he would have predicted, and it was less than a month later when he sauntered into Hattie's and slid onto the empty stool at the counter next to his father, who, absorbed in the newspaper's sporting page, didn't immediately notice him. It hadn't been that long ago, only since Christmas, that Peter had seen him, but in the intervening months, it seemed like the man had segued into advanced old age. His hair and wiry stubble mostly gray, his eyes now rheumy. Finally noticing who now occupied the adjacent stool, Sully folded the newspaper, set it on the counter, and said, "You're just in time. You can give me a lift out to Rub's place." If it hadn't been his father he was talking to, Peter might well have concluded that Ruth had broken her promise and alerted Sully that his son's arrival was imminent. But no, this was just Sully. This was just his father's way. One of the many maddening things about Sully was that he seemed not to fully believe in the world outside of Schuyler County. Despite Peter's absence, he didn't truly accept the fact that his son had moved away and now lived in New York. Somehow, he'd been right here the whole time, and they just hadn't crossed paths. And now here he was, which proved him right. Therefore, no hello, no long time no see, just here you are, good, I've got a job for you. You remember Rub's wife, Bootsy, Sully was saying? She died last week, did you hear? I don't think it made the New York papers, Dad. She had a coronary getting out of the bathtub, Sully said. Peter remembered her, an enormous woman, 300 pounds at least. His father read his thought. I know. How'd you get into the tub to begin with? That's not what I was thinking, Peter lied. Sure it was, Sully said. You know what else you were thinking? No, what? That she must have made one hell of a racket when she went down. Which was true. Peter had been thinking exactly that. Sully was now putting some bills on top of the check so that they could leave. You mind if I have a cup of coffee first? Peter said. Janie, Ruth's daughter, who owned the place now, had seen him come in and was already pouring him one. Look who's here. Look who's here, Sully instructed her, finally displaying muted surprise at Peter's unexpectedly materializing on the stool next to him. Janie set down a steaming cup of coffee and nodded. My personal favorite of all your children, she said, deadpan. Doctoring the coffee, Peter said, has the funeral happened? Yesterday, Sully said. Poor Rub, Sully said. He always felt bad for the man, hapless as he was, a defenseless target of Tully's relentless ribbing. How's he doing? His father shrugged. How would you be doing? Again, Peter pictured the woman in question. And again, his father read his thoughts. She was actually pretty nice when you got to know her, he offered. I don't doubt it, Peter said. And being married to Rub can't have been easy, Sully added. You would know, Peter grinned. Because if Rub had been married to anybody for the last 30 years, it was to Sully. Most nights he didn't even go home to Bootsy until Sully told him to. Sully was studying him now, apparently ready finally to address the fact of his presence. Okay, what gives, he says. As in, Peter said, as in, why are you here? Peter took a sip of coffee. He was, he realized, enjoying this. I live here, he said. Since when? Not long, a couple of days. And not here exactly. I rented an apartment in Schuyler. Sully scratched his stubble thoughtfully. Why? I like it there, Peter said. There's more going on. I might want to go to a movie or hear some music. He lowered his voice. Get a cup of decent coffee? Yeah, but you could live in Miss Burrell's house for free, his father pointed out, which never failed to make Peter smile. His father had owned that house for 2 decades. Compared to Brooklyn, Peter explained, this place that I rented is practically free. Well, suit yourself, Sully conceded. I'm just saying. There's nobody in the upstairs flat. It's yours if you want it. Or if you wanted the downstairs, I could move back up there. It makes no difference to me. Except it did matter. Peter knew. Sully had moved downstairs reluctantly because the stairs had become too much for him. Nah, I'll be fine in Schuyler, Peter assured him. Besides, I've already signed the lease. Sully nodded at him, suspicious now. So what changed your mind? I seem to recall you saying that after Will went off to grad school, you were done with this place forever. I was, Peter said. But then I heard you might need a chauffeur. Right, that's all he said. Somebody told you about my little accident? Well, I heard you had one, Peter said. What happened? Sully paused, contemplating, Peter suspected, how best to make something that would happen only to him make it seem like it could happen to anybody. You know how the parking lot out back of the horse slopes down into the woods? Peter pictured this in his mind's eye. Come on, he said, there are concrete barriers. Well, they tell me I went over one of those, Sully said. You didn't see it? I was facing the other direction, Sully admitted. Peter tried to make this work in his head. That would mean the vehicle was in reverse? That's how I figure it, Sully admitted. It would explain why the ass end of the truck was what hit the tree. Peter massaged his temples. Jesus, he said. What? Sully said. You never made a mistake? How about right now, Peter wanted to say. Coming back here, getting myself sucked back into Sully world, would these qualify as mistakes? Okay, so you're here, Sully continued. What are you planning to do for work? Teach. Where? SCCC, Peter said. He had heard about the just posted opening when he called a friend at Edison College to see if there was any chance of getting his old job back. The other position at the community college being full-time and providing benefits was better. I'm the new chair of the English department there, actually, he said. That would have pleased your mother, Sully said. No, Peter said. Being made chair of the English department at Yale would have pleased my mother. So how come you didn't tell me about this sooner, Sully said. How come you didn't tell me about your accident? Having no ready answer, Sully took out a couple of additional dollars for Peter's coffee and tossed them on top of his check. Janie came back down the counter. 2 Sullivans now, she said. God help us. Sully slid off his stool. Tell your mother I'm going to want a word with her, he said, specifically about that big mouth of hers. I'll tell her, Janie said, but I don't see it ending well for you. She raised an eyebrow, questioning eyebrow about Peter, who agreed with her wholeheartedly. Out front, Sully scanned the cars parked at the curb for one that might belong to his son. This one here, Peter told him, electronically unlocking the Audi A6 that he had paid too much for at the used car lot in Schuyler a couple of days earlier. His father got in, surveyed the car's interior, moved the passenger seat back so that he could stretch out his bum knee. I went to war with Germany, you know, he said. Yeah, Peter said, turning the key in the ignition. Who won? I did, his father told him, as the Audi's engine sprung to throaty life. It was nip and tuck there for a while, though. 18 months. Neither knew it, of course, but that was the amount of time remaining to them. 18 months before Peter would walk into Hattie's one morning and Janie would inform him that Sully had gotten tired of waiting for him and limped up the street toward the OTB to bet his daily trifecta. Peter found him sitting on the bench outside, studying the racing form. Or that's what he appeared to be doing when his heart quit.
I'm so glad you read that chapter in particular. I mean, you get
Well, it's farewell. It's kind of a farewell to that.
Yeah.
To that.
But you get us all laughing, and then you slip the knife in there at the end. It's incredible.
That's what my old man would have said if I'd ever driven an Audi. I went to war with Germany, you know.
All right, we're going a little bit long here, but how are we feeling? We'll go to some questions in a second. I just want to talk about that for a minute. I'm going to drive up to Ontario in December.
I'm sorry?
I'm going to drive up to Ontario in December.
Uh-huh.
And about the halfway point is Gloversville.
Uh-huh.
What if I hop off the highway into Gloversville? What would I find there today that resembles North Bath?
I don't know that you would find anything that resembles North Bath. I will tell you that I went there recently on book tour. My wife and I we went. One of the stops on book tour was Saratoga Springs, which is of course the real life place that inspired my Schuyler Springs, and it's very close to Gloversville where I grew up. And the next day, my cousin Greg and his wife hadn't been able to come to Saratoga that night, and I hadn't seen them in a while, so we decided to drive into Gloversville. When we got there, that's never an easy place for me to go back to, because it was one of the things that my father and mother fought about most desperately when they were still together, which wasn't that long. But they had very different ideas about that place. My mother was desperate, just desperate to get out. To my father, it was home. And it was a place where he could navigate around after coming home from the Second World War, shattered like an awful lot of people were, who made it back, lucky enough to make it back. But it was his home. It was where the people that he cared about most were. And so anyway, my wife and I drove to Gloversville and to our old neighborhood, which was, when I was growing up, it was very, my immediate neighborhood along Hellwig Street and 6th Avenue, where my cousins lived, was a very modest working class neighborhood. A lot of the people who owned those homes had never owned a home before. They had moved from another section of town, and they'd spent this money and hoping that their investment would be a good one, but they weren't sure. What if they got hurt working? Those jobs that they were working at the tanneries and glove shops were dangerous. But my God, they took meticulous care, as my grandfather did, of the house that he bought there, so my mother and I would have a place to live. So we moved when we drove back, we pulled into my old neighborhood, Josh, and I simply could not believe what I saw there. Every third house was boarded up. A lot of the, I mean, you would see people's front porches, their porch completely wrenched away, so that the foundation, I mean, you could no longer go in through the front door. I mean, you'd have to go around back and in through the side door. It was the kind, I was looking at the kind of destitution, financial destitution, that we read about all the time in terms of Appalachia in the Midwest, where the opioid epidemic has just laid waste to whole communities. There were places in Gloversville that I would not have been surprised to see that, but my old neighborhood, where those men like my grandfather, they were my God, it was a photograph of American immigrants. It wasn't like they were all Irish or all Italian or all Polish or whatever. It was everybody was living there, and they had made this one modest leap of faith in America that they could buy a home and take care of it, and it was laid waste. I simply could not believe. So that's not the answer to the question that you asked, and honestly, I took it. What I was so surprised by was how personally I took it.
Right. That's not surprising to me.
No.
No, I mean, Andre used the word haunt earlier. I mean, this place has haunted you.
Yes.
Your whole literary
Yeah.
life. So.
Yes, we're both haunted by the places we grew up.
Yeah. We've touched on about 35% of what I want to talk about, but I feel like we have to take a couple questions for you guys, or I won't be forgiven. So maybe we'll just take like three questions that are burning and the most eager. If anyone wants to raise their hand, or I have plenty if we want to. I see one down in front. Yeah, second row. There.
I'm a novelist as well, and for my first novel, I had 34 rejection letters, but because J.K. Rowling had 43, I was really feeling very optimistic.
That's great.
And thank you to both of you for talking about what it is like at the beginning and to receive so much rejection, but to love your characters so much. And I'm really speaking to you, Richard, because I work on your work. But the characters were so compelling that I know that you love your characters so much that rejection is just part of the process. So thank you for your humility in sharing
Thank
that
you.
part of your story.
Thank you. Give us the title of your novel. What's the novel did you finally sell the novel after 34?
I did.
What's the title?
A Secret Music.
A Secret Music. And what's your full name? They'll go buy it.
Susan Doherty.
Susan Doherty,
Susan
Secret
Doherty
Music.
has a new book. He's going to have a new book out. All right. Congratulations, Susan.
Monday Red Boy. Oh, that's cool.
It's coming out in March.
Oh, fantastic.
Wonderful. Congratulations.
Susan Doherty. That's great.
The first one is the one you never forget. Just the thrill it's unparalleled. Wonderful. Congratulations.
Over here in the.
After spending a lifetime.
I'll repeat it if there's a question. There wasn't before. Oh. Here we go.
Teaching writing to adolescents who I feel are so gifted, and their gift or their imagination is lost. What would you recommend to teachers?
When you say their imagination is lost, are you talking about them staring at phones for 6 to 10 hours a day?
Yeah,
That's not a criticism of teenagers. It's criticism of Silicon Valley.
Let's repeat the question here,
Yeah.
because I missed parts of it too. Did you?
The question being that, what advice would you guys give to teachers who have adolescents who are adrift?
Well, I'm not even going to say they're adrift. I don't feel there's the robust or vigor attributed to their education. And I don't know that it is that they're spending time online. I think they don't have access to these types of events. I would love to see both of you go to high schools
Yeah.
and speak with young people who
Yeah.
are looking for mentors. I don't know that it is that they're distracted. I think they are unable to find a place where they can feel safe to share their creativity. And I guess I would just ask, what do you see for young people looking to really dive deep into writing?
I am just filled with hope for young people. You know, I teach at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, and I've taught at other colleges. I probably visit 20 to 30 high schools a year. I love teenagers because it's horrible to be a teenager. And when I meet a kid who just turns 13, I say, okay, all those nice people say the best years of your life, they're full of it. These are the worst years of your life. It's a black hole, but you're going to get out the other side, and it's going to get better. I have to say, when I made that comment about phones, that was not a knock against young people. I despise Silicon Valley. I hate how addictive these things are. I think it's really robbed young people of their joy. And but I got to tell you, kids today are so beautiful in every single way. They're less materialistic, less misogynistic, less racist. They love the earth more. They're less. They're dying to create, and they're doing great stuff. Yeah. I feel nothing but hope for kids. But what I do, I really do with my students is the phones aren't allowed in the class, and it's a 3-hour class. And I tell them I love you and I hate what these things are doing to you, but I give them a steady diet of really good writing to read. Steady diet. And it's like watching an athlete who maybe would start the day with, beer and donuts, now brewer's yeast, a banana, and some water. And these kids grow. Young people who fill me with nothing but hope, I gotta say. Yeah.
And given why we're here tonight, I got to add one other thing, which is, does everyone know the phrase third place, what a third place is? It's not school and it's not home. And the best third place is the library.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
On that theme, I'm going to end with this note, which is a great line that Rick gave me years ago in an interview. We were talking about the hard-won optimism in your books. And you said, one reason I'm not more pessimistic is that it doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah. You get to be right a lot. But
when you're pessimistic.
but in the end, it doesn't get you anywhere. And I think what can be said of what we do, those of us who are writers or in the arts, I think that art in general, anybody who's an artist of any kind, I think that is essentially hopeful behavior. You cannot, especially if you write, if whatever you're doing takes a long time to get there, how do you sustain yourself over that period of time if you're essentially pessimistic about everything? Art is innately optimistic, or we wouldn't do it. We wouldn't begin if we didn't think that there was hope at the end of it.
Yeah. Can I speak to that? Because I think that's even true of dark art. Like, Mozart's Requiem, he wrote while he was dying. Scorsese's early films, you want to kill yourself afterwards. But at least you walk away thinking, well, my life's better than that. The writer Tobias Wolff, who's a mutual friend, he's got a wonderful line, and this is just echoes right from what Rick just said, but he said, look, even the darkest, bleakest story, like a Kafka story, say, is still inherently affirming. He said, because the greatest sign of despair, it seems to me, is silence. And so that any howl from the dark is positive. and truth illuminating. And you know, one of my favorite lines is from Lao Tzu: soften the light, become one with the dusty world. Isn't that great?
I'm almost going to end on that, but I got to end on you guys.
Okay.
Not that dead guy. You know, what elevates both of your huge bodies of work is how that hard-won hope that's in there, and that you're so honest about that it is hard-won and it's worth it. And I think that's why even at the darkest moments in Tom's life, there is optimism and hope ultimately at the end. And I know that's one of the reasons I go back to you guys over and over and over again. And I'm grateful to you as a reader. I know this room of people is grateful to you as readers.
Thank you. We're grateful to you.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all so much for coming tonight.
Thank you.
It's a great cause.
If you haven't bought a book yet, Josh will run back out and sell you more books, and these guys would be happy to sign them. They're going to set up at the back of the room. There'll be a single line. Grab your book, get in line. Thank you all.
You too.
Josh?
Well done.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a man, well, and taste. I've been around for a long year. Stole many a man's soul and faith. I was around when Jesus Christ had his moment of doubt and pain. Made damn sure the pilot washed his hands, sealed his face. Pleased to meet you. Hope you guess my name.
Assuming we can
But what's puzzling you is the nature of my game. Stuck around St. Petersburg when I saw it was a time for a change. Killed the Tsar and his ministers. Anastasia screamed today. I rode a tank, held a generous rank when the blitzkrieg raged and the bodies stayed.
Yeah, I don't know.